Now broadcasting from beautiful downtown Tallahassee, it's Classic Movie Reviews with Snark.
Welcome to today's show. My name is John. As always, you can subscribe to the show on iTunes or follow the links to social media in the podcast show notes. You can also go to snarkymoviereviews.com to read notes, bios, and other random movie thoughts. Remember, this show is completely free and independent. All I ask is that you jump over to iTunes and give me a review. Today's movie is the campy good House of Frankenstein, 1944. This movie brings together so many good actors and the monsters they played, it can't help but be entertaining. Also, this movie has some interesting lore about stake pulling and who can shoot you with a bullet. I'm going to jump right in with the actors we have previously discussed. The greatest of these is the wonderful Boris Karloff playing the role of the evil, want-to-be Dr. Frankenstein, Dr. Gustav Niemann. Karloff was first introduced in Episode 7, Bride of Frankenstein, 1935. Lon Chaney Jr. was back in a very familiar role, the Wolfman, a.k.a. Larry Talbot. We first spoke about Lon Chaney Jr. in Episode 5 of Mice and Men, 1939. J. Carrol Naish played the hunchback murderer, Daniel. Naish was first mentioned in Episode 25, Sahara, 1943. John Carradine played, of course, Dracula, or as he was sometimes known, Baron Latos. Carradine was first covered in the wonderfully bad Episode 12, Billy the Kid vs. Dracula, 1966. Not surprisingly, Lionel Atwell played the role of Policeman Inspector Arntz. Atwell was introduced in one of my favorite movies, Episode 9, Son of Frankenstein, 1939. William Edmonds had a very small role as Fios. Edmonds is known for playing the bar owner, Mr. Martini, good name trick, in Episode 53, It's a Wonderful Life, 1946. Michael Mark played Strauss, one of the murder victims. Mark was covered for his excellent work in Episode 46, The Wasp Woman, 1959. Clint Strange played the monster, or Frankenstein's monster, whichever you want to call him. Strange had over 300 roles, and I'm not going to get into that now. He stood 6 foot 5 inches tall, so he was a good fit for the monster. He is known for a bunch of westerns, The Mad Monster 1942, House of Frankenstein 1944, House of Dracula 1945, and Abbott and Costello Meet Frankenstein 1948. But in spite of all that, he will always be known as Sam the Bartender on television's Gunsmoke, 1961-73. Frank Reacher played Ullman, the Mad Doctor's former assistant. Reacher played the boat captain in King Kong 1933, but he was not discussed. Sig Rumman was cast in the role of Burgermeister Hussmann. Rumman was born in Germany in 1884. He was in the German Army in World War I before moving to the U.S. in 1924. He started working regularly on Broadway. When movies switched to talkies, he became very popular. He was in several Marx Brothers films, including A Night at the Opera, 1935, A Day at the Races, 1937, and A Night in Casablanca, 1946. His German accent kept him busy in the World War II era, playing the enemy in films such as Confession of a Nazi Spy, 1939, They Came to Blow Up America, 1943, and The Hitler Gang, 1944. However, his greatest role was when he played POW guard Sergeant Schultz in the magnificent Stalag 17, 1953. He was also in Nina Kochka, 1939, and To Be or Not to Be, 1942. Before he died in 1967, he had over 100 film appearances. Story: Mad scientist and doctor Gustav Niemann, Boris Karloff, and hunchback Daniel, J. Carrol Naish, are rotting away in Neustadt prison. Niemann was imprisoned for trying to put a human brain in a dog, yet he dreams of continuing his work. He explains that he learned from his brother, who was an assistant to Dr. Frankenstein. Daniel is filled with hope that Niemann could give him a new body. Niemann just dreams of revenge on the people that imprisoned him. Just on cue, lightning strikes the prison, allowing the pair to escape. As they wander through the woods in the rainstorm, they come upon a wagon that was stuck in the mud. After the criminals get the wagon unstuck, they are invited into the wagon of Bruno Lampini. Lampini has a traveling show that exhibits the bones of Dracula, complete with a wooden stake where the heart had been. Niemann scoffs at the claim, but Lampini says he collected the body, soul, and coffin himself from Dracula's castle in Transylvania. Nyman asks if the show ever travels to Vassaria, and Lampini replies that they have had enough horrors there already. Nyman then asks about Herr Husman, Sig Ruman, and finds out he is the Burgermeister of Regelsburg. Nyman demands that Lampini take them to Regelsburg. When he refuses, Daniel strangles him. They later kill the other members of the show and assume their places. Back in Regelsburg, Husman is playing chess with Inspector Hans Arndt's Lionel Atwell. Husman's grandson Carl and his American bride Rita come downstairs and want to go see Lampini's horror show. The four head to the show on foot. They go to the show where Nyman, acting as Lampini, reveals the coffin with the skeleton of Dracula. Husman scoffs much like Nyman did earlier. Then Inspector Arndt says, "You're not the Lampini I ran away from here before." Nyman quickly says he got the show from his brother who had died. Husman thinks he knows the new Lampini but can't place him. When the show closes, Nyman pulls the stake from Dracula's heart. This is the only part of the movie I remember from watching this as a youth, so it must have had a profound effect. The body slowly reanimates, bones, veins, and finally into Dracula, John Carradine, fully clothed. Dracula starts glamming Nyman, but the doctor is too strong. Nyman says he will protect Dracula's coffin if he will help him with revenge. Drac agrees. The inspector leaves the Husmans as he walks to his home. Shortly after, Dracula arrives in a coach and picks the Husmans up. He introduces himself as Baron Lotto. They decide to go to the Husmans' house and invite Dracula into the house. After some drinking, the Burgermeister falls asleep and Carl goes to get more wine, leaving Rita with Dracula. Dracula basically glams her and gives her his ring. He tells her he will return for her before dawn. The Burgermeister wakes up and goes into his office where he discovers the identity of Nyman. However, Dracula shows up and kills the older Husman. In this movie, he turns into a bat to kill. Upstairs, Rita is acting crazy, and Carl sees the crest of Dracula ring on her hand. He locks her in and goes to find his grandfather. When he finds the man dead, he calls Inspector Arndt. He goes back upstairs, but Rita is missing. Carl sees her get into the carriage with Dracula. Inspector Arndt shows up with two others, and the four head after Dracula. Nyman is fleeing ahead of Dracula, believing the police are chasing him. When he realizes they are chasing after Dracula, he has Daniel go back and toss the vampire's coffin out of the wagon. Nyman didn't even keep the deal for one day. Dracula is having a bad night as the carriage bolt slips out and the wagon wrecks. He tries to make it to the coffin, but sunlight hits him before he can make it. He reverts back and even his clothes disappear. Odd. Dracula's ring falls off Rita. Just for the record, he could have turned into a bat and flown to safety, especially when the wagon crashed. Nyman and Daniel head to the town of Frankenstein, hoping to find Dr. Frankenstein's notes in the castle. When they get near the town, a beautiful gypsy girl, Alanka, Elena Verdugo, is dancing. Daniel is thunderstruck by her. The police show up and tell Nyman that they can't exhibit horrors because they've had enough. They point out Frankenstein's castle and say no one mentions that place since the dam broke and swept the Wolfman and Frankenstein's monster away. They seem to be describing the end of episode 10, Frankenstein Meets the Wolfman, 1943. But that movie was set in Vassaria, not Frankenstein. They gave out a lot of information for something that is never talked about. The head gypsy, Fijos, William Edmonds, tries to take Alanka's dancing money and they get into a fight. When he begins to whip her, Daniel steps in and almost kills the man. Daniel takes Alanka with them. Alanka is at first repelled by Daniel, but later likes the attention. Nyman finds a way to the castle, and he and Daniel head out. On the way, Nyman promises Daniel a new body. In the lower reaches of the destroyed castle, Daniel falls through the floor. Nyman follows him down, and they find the frozen bodies of the Wolfman and the monster. Daniel builds a fire and thaws the creatures out. Since the moon is not full, the thawed-out Wolfman turns into Larry Talbot, Lon Chaney Jr. He is still upset about being a werewolf. The Frankenstein monster is in much worse condition and doesn't wake up right away. Nyman tells Talbot that he will remove the curse by giving him a new body. I don't see the logic. Talbot takes Nyman to the journal entitled Experiments in Life and Death by Henry Frankenstein. Nyman decides they need to go back to Visaria and set up a proper laboratory. Nyman foils Daniel's plans by having Talbot drive the wagon with Alanka while Daniel remains in the back tending to the rotten body of the Frankenstein monster. Of course, as soon as Alanka meets the deeply depressed and stoic Talbot, she falls head over heels. It must be some kind of Florence Nightingale complex. I can fix him! Daniel is out and not taking it well. Nyman is unconcerned with Daniel's problems, both physical and emotional. The doctor is only concerned with the two monsters. When the group reaches Visaria, they went right to work cleaning up the castle, but most of the domestic stuff was done by Alanka. Nyman goes right to work on the monster while Talbot and Daniel worry more and more about the promises made to them. Nyman's next order of business was to track down those who testified against him. The pair kidnap Strauss and Ullman. Nyman tells Ullman that his brain will be placed in Frankenstein's monster and Strauss's mind will be placed in the body of Talbot. This is where I'm confused. It seems to me, and I'm not that kind of scientist, that if a werewolf curse could be split, it would go with the brain of Talbot and not stay in his body. Back at the lab, they remove both men's brains. During the operation, Daniel asks Nyman for the strong body of Talbot. Nyman rudely dismisses the request and says the monster's brain will go into Talbot's body. Is he trying to create a Franken werewolf? Daniel goes to Alanka and tells her Talbot is a werewolf. She responds pretty rudely to him. She runs out crying, and Daniel takes the time to whip the unconscious monster because he is getting the good body. That night the full moon rises, and Talbot turns into the Wolfman. He runs off and kills another villager. With 3 people now missing, the town folks become concerned and form a search party. At sunup, they find the man killed by the Wolfman. Right off the bat, they recognize the wounds as coming from a werewolf. They decide to split into 3 groups. Wait, there is a werewolf. Maybe we should stay together. Alanka tries to comfort Talbot, but he is having a big old pity party. Talbot tells her to stay away or she might be harmed. At this point, I have to mention, they are in a castle, and there is probably a place where they could lock the Wolfman up for a couple of nights. Anyway, Alanka takes her silver necklace and melts it into a bullet. In this movie, the bullet must be fired by one who, quote, loves him enough to understand, unquote. I was thinking how handy Alanka was because she knows how to smelt her own bullets. As it gets closer to dark and werewolf time, Talbot comes into the lab where Nyman and Daniel are working. Nyman tells Talbot to be patient. He's going to turn into a werewolf in a bit. Talbot almost kills the doctor as the voltage is making the monster smoke. A couple of men see lights flashing in the castle and report it to the search party. The monster wakes up and tries to grab Daniel before he passes out again. Nyman sends Daniel to get Talbot, but he is in his room wolfing out while Alanka waits outside the door. The search party is moving towards the castle. Alanka goes outside the castle, by the glass door where they have housed the guy that turns into a werewolf 3 nights a month. The werewolf attacks Alanka and she shoots him in the chest with the silver bullet. They both fall to the ground, but before she dies, she crawls onto the Wolfman, who has turned back into Talbot. Daniel finds the woman he loves and takes her back to the laboratory where Nyman is waiting. Nyman blames Daniel, and Daniel begins to strangle the doctor. About this time, the monster wakes up and breaks free. He grabs Daniel and throws him out the skylight to his death. The monster grabs the wounded doctor and starts out, but the search party shows up. Since they know the monster well, they use fire to chase him to the swamp. The search party sets the marsh on fire and sends the monster further into the swamp. Nyman and the monster end up in quicksand and sink to their death. Or did they? World famous short summary: you love her, but she loves him, and he loves somebody else. If you enjoyed this week's show, please tell your friends. And if you really want to help, drop over to iTunes and give me a review. If you want to comment, recommend a movie, or just say hi, Follow the links in the show notes to my site. Beware the Moors.